Hey there and welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today. Hope you're having a great week. And I'm excited because in this episode, we are talking about how much sex should married couples be having. And I figured this one's actually doesn't need to be a long episode. I can give you the answer in about 30 seconds right up front. The answer is very simple. It's more, always more, right?
There you have it.
I'm just kidding. Kind of, not completely, but.
But this is really a question that we get from couples often, and we've had to talk about it as well. And if you're listening or watching, you might just be curious about how much sex other couples are having, or maybe you think that you should be having more or less sex. So that's what we're going to get into.
Yeah, and we want to be upfront out of the gate here. We are pastors, and so we come from a pastoral point of view. We're going to look at a biblical point of view. I don't know how you're listening or watching this, so maybe you're not sure kind of what the Bible says about all of this. Know this, God created sex. He created it, yes, for procreation. I mean, we got 5 kids, but he also created it for pleasure, and that's why we got 5 kids.
Right.
So, I mean, yes, there's pleasure is definitely a part of it. And we believe that marriage is the place that God designed sex for, right? So sex is for the confines of marriage. We believe outside of that, it's unhealthy and it's not all that God wants it to be.
Right. But to get back to the original question, how much sex should you be having in your marriage? And that's really a question that's kind of hard to answer because there is no one right answer. But there is a right answer for you and your spouse. So we're hoping that through this episode, we'll give you some ways to start the discussion toward that.
Yeah, absolutely. I can actually remember when we first got married, I had maybe some what I would call unrealistic expectations about the frequency of sex. Our first month of marriage, not to get into graphic detail, but our first month of marriage, we had sex at least once every single day. And I was like, I think this is what it's going to be like forever. I still remember the day when Carol was like, not tonight. And I rolled over and I pouted and I thought, how dare she? Doesn't she know I'm a man? And a man has needs and they're not being met. This is unfair. And eventually the frequency of sex went down probably to a healthier level, at least for the dynamic of our relationship. Mm-hmm. But then it started to slide more and more and more and got to a place where I was constantly frustrated about the frequency of which we were having sex.
Yeah, but the truth was that we had really grown apart and Ray wanted intimacy in the bedroom, but I really wanted intimacy everywhere else. And we just kind of ended up in this vicious cycle where neither one of us were getting our needs met and neither one of us were willing to bend.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when we talk about how often we should have sex, there are a lot of dynamics at play, and we're going to talk about some of them. We can't get into everything. Honestly, this could be, hours and hours. You could do so many episodes of this, but ultimately, sex isn't just about sex. And I want you to remember that. Right. It's really about creating a healthy and great marriage. And when you have a healthy and great marriage, I promise you, you're going to have healthy and better sex as well, and probably more sex.
Right. Well, how many times you have sex is really not the issue, right? Whether or not you feel like you're having sex too much or too little, it really doesn't matter. The frequency of sex is an outgrowth issue, not the root issue. The real issue is revolving around your expectations of what marriage is and what marriage isn't. And we've talked a little bit about this before.
Yeah, marriage isn't there for you to be able to eliminate all your problems or for it to solve all your problems. That's not like your spouse's job. Yeah. Marriage isn't about you having all of your selfish desires met. God's design for marriage is centered around sacrifice, selflessness, serving one another. In fact, if you look at the Bible, there's a picture of the church and the bride and groom, and we as the church are the bride. Jesus, God, he's the groom. And so as you see that, Jesus, what did he do? He came to serve. He sacrificed in giving his life. He lived selflessly everywhere that he went. And so men especially, I just want to encourage you as the groom, this is your role to serve, to sacrifice, to live selflessly on behalf of your wife.
Yeah, and I think that's true for women as well. When you have a relationship with two selfish people, you're going to end up with a manipulative relationship, right? Because both of you are just trying to get the other one to meet your needs. But if you have one selfish person and one person who's always serving, then you can end up with an abusive marriage where one person is always winning and the other one is always losing. But if you both look to serve each other, put each other's needs ahead of your own, then you're going to have a beautiful marriage and build this life of love and intimacy and happiness.
Yeah, and I think intimacy is the key word there, right? Because even if you're having sex the right amount of times, we talked about this like in our marriage, there were times when we were having sex maybe the right amount, but we weren't having good sex. It wasn't like a healthy or connective sex. And so intimacy really is the key word that we need to remember here. Yeah. But let's get into the numbers, because I know that's why all of you are listening. That's why all of you are watching. It's what you came for, right? You want to know, how do we compare to everybody else, all right? The average couple in America has sex roughly 60 times a year. It equates to about 7 times a month or 1 to 2 times a week, all right? Younger couples tend to have a little bit more sex, about 80 times a year. And then by the decade, you kind of see sex goes down. It's on the decline. And that can be for a number of reasons, obviously hormones and, physical different issues that you might have as you age. And so, but we see on average around 1 to 2 times a week.
Yeah. And for definition purposes, we just want to hit on the fact that a sexless marriage is defined as a couple who has sex less than or 10 times or less per year. Yeah. So that's important to note. But maybe you're listening and you're thinking, aha, yes, we are having sex more than the average couple. We've got it. Or maybe you're having sex less than the average couple and you're going to run out and tell your spouse right now that you need to be having more sex. Right? But, let us remind you that frequency does not equate to good sex. That's really not what it's about.
A few things to consider. Some studies have found a direct correlation between frequency of sex and satisfaction. But it is important to note that they said once you cross that 1 time a week threshold, you really don't see maybe marginal gains, really small gains after that. So if you're having sex 3 times a week or 1 time a week, you're probably pretty similar in the fulfillment category there. Yeah. We'll talk about why those numbers maybe break down a little bit and why they could be a little bit skewed here in a moment. But on happiness, numerous studies show that married couples are actually the happiest and most fulfilled in their sex lives. So not singles, not those living together. So if you're out there and like married sex is the worst sex, you're locked into one part. It's the best sex, studies actually show us. So come on, married couples, we'll give a shout out to all of you.
Right. But maybe one of the biggest discrepancies that we noticed was that only 61% of women said that sex was pretty good, while 80% of men said the same.
Now, first of all, can we just talk about pretty, like I don't know if we have sex and then like you roll over and be like, that was pretty good. Like I'm never excited about that.
Hey, but it's better than, hey, that was pretty bad.
That's very true. But you do see kind of the difference between men and women there.
Yeah. And years ago, we heard somebody say that men tend to be more like microwaves where they're quick and ready at any given moment. And women tend to be more like crock pots. So we take a little longer to heat up and
yeah, but you stay warm a little longer too, I guess.
I guess that would be true.
I won't go too far with this analogy. And of course, that might not be the case. Your relationship dynamic might be a little bit different. There are certainly exceptions, but men tend to be ready for sex at any point, all right? I think that's probably something we've seen more often than not, at least. I think of the line from the Avengers. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but Bruce Banner, he's like about to go out in to fight the battle, and like one of the Avengers is like, hey, you need to get angry right now so you can turn into the Hulk. And he turns back and he says, that's my secret. I'm always angry. And I think, men, that's our secret. We're always ready. All right. We're always ready for sex. But women do tend to need a little bit more preparation, not necessarily in the bedroom as much as maybe throughout the course of the day. However, that's not to say that creating intimacy outside of the bedroom is only for women, because I think this is often a misnomer that, women need this, men don't need it. Listen, if she's flirting with me throughout the day, then sex is going to be better by the time we hit the bedroom.
That's right. That's a good point. And when we go back to the numbers, I know we said that studies show that if you have sex at least once a week, your satisfaction doesn't rise much beyond that. But there's another aspect that we do need to touch on. So often satisfaction in sex is supplemented through pornography. So even though a man or a woman might say that they're satisfied, we have to take into account that they're viewing porn or often masturbating frequently in addition to having sex with their partner. And we want to be clear here, we believe that porn in any form is detrimental to your marriage, especially in marriage. It's not God's design. It's not his plan, whether you're viewing it alone or even with permission from your partner or viewing it together. That's not what God designed marriage for. And porn usage is linked to a lower desire to have sex with your partner because it really distorts your view of what sex is in reality.
Yeah, so we want you to remember that, because when you factor all of this in, I actually think the frequency or the amount of times you're having sex in a healthy marriage probably goes up, especially if you're not supplementing it in this other way. Because what is that really showing us? It's showing us when you're supplementing it, you're not satisfied. You might say you're satisfied, but you're really not, because you're having to go somewhere else to continue in that. So ultimately, it's about making sure that both of you are satisfied. That's the thing you need to take away from this episode. If you take anything away, both of you need to be satisfied. That's the aim. Chances are you're going to have different sex drives, though, and one of you is going to want to have more sex. One of you is going to want to have less sex. We'll let you figure that out in our relationship. But what do you do in these situations?
Yeah, well, I think we can look to the Bible for that. 1 Corinthians 7, verses 2 through 5 says, "Because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise..."
Conjugal rights.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that word, but it's in the Bible, so we're going to go with it. "And likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does."
Did you all hear that? How dare Paul? He wrote this.
That's right. But he also wrote, "Likewise the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does."
Seems fair.
Yes. "Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer, but then come together again."
Amen.
Yes, and amen. "So that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control."
God is pro-sex, and here Paul outlines what our sexual relationship within, again, the confines of marriage should look like. And if you notice, he uses that selfless, that sacrificial language. You should give yourself to the other, right? Your body's not your own type language. And we see this not just in our sexual relationship, but we see this throughout the course of the Bible. This is the type of marriage we want to cultivate, where we serve one another. And I promise you, listen, if you serve your spouse consistently, you're going to have a happier and healthier marriage. Yeah. And that's going to lead to a happier and healthier sex life. It's just the outflow of a good marriage. But how do we best serve our spouse? I think that's the $1 million question. And one of the first things we have to do is we have to learn how to talk about sex. And I'm not talking about saying how much we want to have, or what our favorite position is, or what we like. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about asking questions about what your spouse likes.
Yeah, get curious. One study showed that more than half of women reported that they had wanted to communicate with their spouse about sex, but ultimately decided that they wouldn't, because they either didn't want to hurt their partner's feelings, maybe they felt uncomfortable, or maybe they were simply embarrassed. And I grew up in a house that didn't really talk about sex growing up, so I did find a lot of embarrassment in that when we first got married, and it was hard to talk about, but it's so important to talk about it.
Yeah, and talking about sex is, like she said, incredibly important. But the truth is, many women, they're not going to achieve orgasm through intercourse. And so if you don't know that, if you're not talking about that, they need some sort of manual stimulation for a lot of women. Guys, if this is something you're not talking about, you're not asking your wife these questions, then think about how unsatisfied she may be. Now, that's not the case for all women, but you want to be able to know that in case it is the situation. It's important to understand, how can you serve your spouse better, not just in the bedroom, but obviously everywhere, but certainly also in the confines of sex.
It's also really important to talk about your marriage. Like we said, a stronger marriage is going to lead to a better sex life, and chances are greater frequency as well.
Yeah, I remember when we were really struggling in our marriage, all I was focused on was like the frequency of how much we were having sex. And here was Carol, and she was focused on this emotional connection, and it just really led to a lot of issues that we had.
Yeah, and honestly, I would withhold sex intentionally because I didn't feel like Ray was making an effort to connect with me outside of the bedroom. And I really just kind of dug my heels in and said, if he's not going to try, then I'm not going to try. And when our relationship really hit rock bottom and we had to make a decision to stay together and work it out, and we really started working on a relationship, I made a personal commitment to myself that I wasn't going to say no to him when he wanted to have sex. And that was really important for me because I had used it as a weapon. And I didn't voice that to him that I was never going to say no to him, but it was really a commitment I made to me. And I kept that. And as time has gone by, I've gotten better able to communicate my wants and needs when it comes to sex. But it really is, honestly, if I said no every time I didn't feel like having sex, we wouldn't have sex very often. So,
Yeah. And I would just say sometimes, this is kind of a life lesson. You can't be led by your feelings all the time.
Right.
Feelings are important. We're actually going to do a whole another episode where we talk a lot more about our feelings, but they're important to pay attention to, but they're terrible leaders. And so, because they fluctuate, they go up and down based on, the emotion or the moment, and so many situations can contribute to those feelings. And so sometimes we have to move forward. And by the way, I'm not just talking about if you're not wanting to have sex and you don't going with that feeling. Listen, if you're always wanting to have sex, sometimes you need to not always be led by those feelings either. That's really important. But talking about marriage really requires a great deal of vulnerability. I want you to think about that. And it can be scary, I think, for both sides, maybe for different reasons usually, but it can be scary, but the benefits are so incredible. In fact, let me throw this one out there. As an added bonus, 92% of people said they were turned on when their partner chose to show vulnerability to them. So added bonus.
That's right.
Guys all out there, you need to, maybe shed a tear.
Get in touch with your emotional side.
That's right. Not manipulative way, but real and authentic.
Course.
Yes.
But it's also important to recognize that there are seasons in life.
Yeah.
So there are times when your sex life will be affected just by the season that you're in. When you have a new baby at home, maybe, and you're not sleeping and you're exhausted all the time, you're probably going to have sex less, right? Maybe you have opposite work schedules from your spouse, and it's just hard to find that time to connect. Or maybe you're traveling a lot for your job, or you're deployed overseas, or whatever the case might be. There are seasons in life where you're going to have less sex, but just know that it's a season. It's not going to last forever. Right. And the goal is to work back towards a healthy, fulfilling sex life for both of you.
Yeah. And I mean, I would say even those seasons, they can be healthy. Now, you can get creative in some of those situations, but you want to make sure that you're always, again, aiming towards health. And it's also important to be considerate in these seasons, because a lot of times we're focused on what we're not getting, right? Or what we feel like we should be owed, or what we want. And if your spouse is tired from working all day long, and then you're coming in asking for sex, chances are you can probably wait. Or maybe you look to have sex at different times. Like, I know if I ask Carol to have sex all the time late at night, probably ain't going to happen a whole lot. But if I'm like, hey, the kids aren't home, it's the middle of the day, this might be a great time. She's had her cup of coffee and ready to go. You just got to time it right.
Yeah, but it's really important to just have fun and enjoy sex. Your sex life should be enjoyable. And when you're having fun together outside of the bedroom, you're going to enjoy sex more as well.
Yeah. And another thing we want to let you know is sometimes your sex life has maybe broken down. It's gotten to a point where you're at an impasse. You feel like the other person's not listening, or they're not on the same page. Maybe you need to bring in a trusted third party. And that could be maybe a doctor. It could be a Christian or a Christian counselor even.
Yeah. And we've known couples who have struggled with sex, especially early in marriage, with pain issues. Sex should be pleasurable. So if you are feeling pain, if there's issues going on, something feels off, please talk to a doctor. It could be something that's really easy to resolve so you can get to enjoying sex with your partner.
Right.
On the other hand, maybe you're not having physical issues. You've talked about sex, and one or the other, or both of you even, is just not satisfied with your sexual relationship. It could be a good idea to bring somebody else into the picture. Find a Christian counselor. There are Christian sex therapists out there you can talk to that can give you some tools to work toward a more satisfying, fulfilling sex life.
Yeah, absolutely. So those are some things that you can do, but we want to give you just a few quick tips here as well. The first one is cut porn out. Get rid of it. Just get it out of the picture, and maybe you're saying, well, I'd love to do that. I've tried to do that, but I just don't know how. I used to tell people as a youth pastor for a lot of years, had a lot of, young men especially who would come and say, hey, I'm struggling. I don't know what to do. And I'd be like, it's all about accountability, because that's all I was ever taught. And I think accountability is an important aspect of it. But can I really tell you the secret to stop watching porn? It's to get close to Jesus. And if you spend time with God and you begin to cultivate a heart for Him and a heart for your spouse, then you're not going to have the same types of desires. Or when you do have those desires, you have the tools to be able to move forward and not to give into those temptations. So I just want to encourage you, grow close to Jesus. Yes, have accountability. There's apps, there's wonderful tools. Make sure that you use wisdom there, but you also want to make sure to cultivate your relationship with Him.
Right. And move toward vulnerability with your spouse. What do you need to share today that maybe you have held back from saying? I think vulnerability and intimacy really go hand in hand, and you're going to develop a more intimate relationship with your spouse if you're willing to say the hard things and know that they love you and that they want to move forward with you. So don't let a root of bitterness grow between you by not saying the thing you need to say.
Yeah, and then look for ways to serve your spouse, not only inside the bedroom, but outside the bedroom. So, guys, I'm just saying, some physical touch goes a long way. Let me just stop this. Some non-sexual physical touch goes a long way, all right?
If you're familiar with the 5 love languages from Dr. Gary Chapman, we took this test and we both scored really high on physical touch, but our ideas of physical touch are very different, right? It's 100% sex. Me, I want like a massage or hold my hand or, I don't know.
I don't mind those
Give
things
me a
if
hug.
they lead to sex, but but seriously, like maybe mix that in. And again, I'm not saying every guy is like that, but that can be the case. And then ladies, like a flirty text goes a long way. I promise you, like if you listen to this episode and you send a text and then he figures out what, he might actually even listen to this episode with you. Like he'll be like, I need to listen to that. So, but that can really, those little things can just make your sex life a little bit more fun and enhance things.
Yeah, once in a while I'll add sex to our shared calendar and it just pops up on his phone. And
That's what she said. Sorry. I had to say it somewhere in here, but anyway. Hey, just as a real practical application step you can take, we obviously love you listening to this episode, but I did preach a sermon a few months ago. It was entitled How to Have the Best Sex Ever. It's maybe not a message you would normally hear in church. In fact, I can almost promise you it's probably not a message on sex that you've heard in church, at least very often. And so I encourage you, we'll put a link in the description. Go listen to that and then work on having some better sex.
Yeah, it's really great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to click the bell so you'll be notified of future episodes. We don't want you to miss out on anything. But thank you so much for joining us. We will see you again next time.